So what are you gonna get your wife for Christmas?
Oh, you're gonna ask that now? I mean, this episode is gonna air after. So I got her a sweater. Sounds so boring. But I got her a ton of other stuff as well. And she wanted it. She needs a sweater. She needs a sweater in her life.
She's freezing.
Yeah, exactly.
She's
So I got her
freezing.
one. I gave her warmth. Okay. What did you get your wife?
Well, I will know by the time this episode airs.
Someone will have taken care of it.
No, but I also discussed it with her. She's like, I also don't have anything for you yet. So it's like you feel a little bit less bad.
Yeah,
you
it
know?
takes pressure off. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. It's also like at this point in time, you know, what do you really need? And it's such a luxury thing to say, but what do you really need more of in your life? It's like, it's not things. I can tell you that. It's like time would be great. Sleep, I would love that.
Sleep would be great.
Such a great gift.
Yeah.
You know what? There could just be a card saying, honey, you know what I got you? A weekend
Sleeping.
off. I'm going to take the kids, go to Sweden, stay here, sleep. There's beer in the fridge. Enjoy. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, I love you.
Yeah. Can I marry you again?
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of going to Sweden,
Yeah. Wow.
In today's episode,
she is.
we are going to talk about going to another country. We're going to talk about expanding to a new market,
Yeah.
but in a more scrappy way, because I think the environment kind of dictates it. That is not going to be the big, flashy investment that you do, right?
So going into a new market, everyone is thinking it's super expensive, right? Oh, you need to open up a new office, you need to hire these people, and
Coffee
super risky.
machines.
Is it going to work out? Is it not going to work out?
Yeah.
You're going to fail. I think when you are listening and you're in the US, going to a new market that's like super late in your in the company's lifetime, and then the first market you go to is like either Australia or it's the UK.
Yeah, Ireland,
not-
where the taxes.
Not too far away.
Yeah.
You need to speak our language.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's weird. However, when you're here in Europe, and especially when you're in Denmark. By the way, who doesn't know it, but Denmark has like 6 million people.
Yeah, it's a small market.
It's basically, I don't know, it's New York plus Hoboken or something like that. It's a very, very small kind of place here. You basically are forced to go into a new market pretty early on.
Yeah.
And you also don't have the luxury to scale your team and be like, okay, let's have 20 reps. And then once you have 20 reps, you kind of bracket them into the SMB and commercial and enterprise. No, you won't be able to have 20 reps in Denmark for most businesses. So before you even reach 20 reps, you have 5 in Germany, 7 in the UK, and whatever left in the Nordics, right? And as much as you want to cut by segment, because that's really important, right? It's the career ladder also, it's like more expensive resource and so forth, and more specialized. You have to cut by language first. There's just no way around it, right? And since it's super early for us in the lifetime to enter into a new market, you also can't make it a super big bet or something like that. You don't have the money for that.
Yeah.
And that's why we wanted to talk a bit about how do you expand into a new market in a scrappy kind of way, which I think fits the times to a degree. But also, why should you do it even in the first place?
Yeah.
Mikkel? Why should you go into a new market?
Well, you need to find ways to grow. Period. And you need to assess whether this can be one. But if we're talking about some of the benefits of opening up in another market, I remember when we opened up first US, my Slack time extended. Would sit at night. That was the downside. But then when Australia opened, I just went crazy, because then it was 24/7, right? But the benefit actually is that all of a sudden you get more coverage, right? So think about having a rep in one time zone servicing leads in another. By default, you will have to wait for that rep to wake up in order to process the leads. And we all know that, the faster you can pick up the phone and reach an inbound, the more higher chances are you're going to convert that into a meeting and into a customer. So
couldn't you just hire someone in the Philippines to do that?
I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
Depends on what you're selling.
So
probably.
I think there's a couple of upsides. One is existing demand in the market. So you might be in the US, you might be selling nationally, and all of this is great. But But being able to tap into some other markets sometimes comes with some additional scaffolding you need to build. You can't just have customers in Germany suddenly because, well, you can't speak the language. That's difficult. And, you know,
And you need a business card.
Germans and French people, they don't speak English, you know. And the next thing is you need to service them also. So you need to be somewhere on the time zone there, et cetera, right? So these things, if you jump over that barrier of entry barrier to entry, when you jump over that, you basically can access the existing demand that's in the market already, right?
Yeah.
And I think another thing is, and you mentioned this previously when we kind of just chatted about this episode, is you become a little bit more legit for that market.
Oh yeah.
So when I was able to not send out order forms from a Falcon.io APS, so APS is kind of the Danish version of a limited, but I actually could send it from an ink. That was great.
Yeah.
Everyone was looking at this APS thing. It's like, is this company legit? They seem big and it's a good product, but you know, this is scam. And rightly so. People should be thinking this. And you know, once you have an ink, that's great. Once you have an actual, you know, address somewhere in the US, that's great. And so forth, right? And the same goes for Germany. If you have like a GmbH, kind of that's the same thing as a limit. Kind of people recognize and see that. And I think then there's another like almost serendipity coming out of this. So you are in the market, you bump into more people, suddenly something happens and so forth. And those upsides you wouldn't be able to unlock otherwise, right?
No.
I think very rarely is the real reason why you expand is because you're running out of TAM. I think very rarely that's really the case. Sure, Denmark, maybe that's a thing. But otherwise, when the US, when you're in Germany, when you're in UK, I mean, rarely. Let's just say it like that, right? So it's really, you can also think about it like it's a start of a new S-curve to a degree. It's a start of, okay, now in this country I can run Google Ads, which is super cheap in the beginning, right? There are a couple of those reasons which basically new markets unlock for you. So you get, I would say you get a bit of a boost in the beginning. And then it transitions into the normal process that you would see. And yes, there's a little bit of a product market fit, go-to-market fit question, totally. And you need to, you need to figure out how can you remove that risk? How can you not do all the investments and then basically kind of realize, oh, we have a big product market fit issue here because, I don't know, privacy features missing or something. Or all my servers are in like, in the US. And I'm trying to sell to Germany. That's not going to work, by the way. And you find out these things. So how can you hedge yourself against running into those silly issues that basically kind of take the product market, go-to-market fit away, right?
I think another cool thing is also you will probably see a lot of the processing metrics increase if you nail it, actually. But let's get into the solution mode. So how do you do it in a Scrappy way?
Yes. So what I've done a few times now is you just open up that new market without doing anything about it. So step number one, you hire a couple of reps or repurpose existing reps. And depending on time zone issues, you start having them sell into the new market. So what we did at one company is we basically had reps starting at, I think, 2 p.m. or 1 p.m. And then had the regular hours until 8 p.m., something like that. And that then meant that they had some quite nice overlap with the US. They basically had 8 a.m. Eastern time overlap until, late afternoon. And they started doing outbound. They started doing, running those deals. We could then put some ads live in the US. Once we started to sign some customers, we then had some CS reps that also came in late and so forth. It worked to a degree. It wasn't great.
No.
It was not great for morale for those folks.
No.
Also really difficult to crack open a new market with Rasmus and Anders and, from an APS. And, but that basically kind of allowed us to, just test and check out, can we do this?
Yeah,
Does our outbound motion work in the US?
Yeah.
Do our ads that we put up online for inbound, does that actually work out? And I think we did this, I would say 3 months, maybe a little bit longer. We had all kinds of fancy board targets we wanted to achieve. We wanted to kind of sign X amount of lighthouse customers, meaning like like a really recognizable brand.
Yeah.
We totally didn't do that. We just didn't achieve it. And then at some point we basically made the decision to open up a tiny office. We jumped on something that resembled a WeWork. At that point, WeWork wasn't a big thing yet.
Yeah.
We did lemon squeeze. Mick, if you hear it, kind of those were the days. I still have one of the lemon squeeze mugs at home, by the way. We basically kind of then hired 4 SDRs.
Yeah.
And our head of sales, one of the head of sales from Europe, basically kind of went there for a year.
Yeah.
That's kind of how that fully started. And it was like 4 SDRs and 1 or 2 AEs or something like this.
Yeah.
And then we just started. At that point, we stopped this kind of shifted time zone operation in Denmark because it just wasn't the right thing anymore. And then for a year, we just tried to figure this out, right? And it was, I'm not sure if we spent like $1 million on this, but it's only $1 million, honestly, right? And it sounds a lot maybe for some, but it's probably the cheapest budget you can have in entering the US, basically, right? And that proved out pretty successful in the beginning. Kind of, we were able to build a little bit of a beachhead there. We started to have a Delaware Incorporated Inc. We had a post office kind of thing there. We had an office. We had people that were called Joe and and Jack,
American sounding
and Bob.
names. Yeah.
So all of these things helped out quite a lot. And then I think the next phase really was the head of sales then went back. Also family reasons, and I think he became a dad in between and stuff. It was really good. I moved over there, and then we hired local leadership. Yeah, which was, I think, a big unlock. That's the big unlock next step. And then local leadership also brings a lot of like, oh no, you can't do it like this. Yeah. We had like, there's so many stupid things that are happening. For example, paychecks in the US. Yeah. If you don't know this, everyone is basically paid bi-weekly. Yeah. So it gets a paycheck every 2 weeks because they spend everything immediately. Yeah. Can't wait a whole month. Yeah. And we were basically like, no, we're only paying like monthly. And they were like, no, this is not how this works. Yeah. And a couple of other of those things, basically, which was pretty good to kind of know them. And then also just adapting to how selling works in the US. Yeah. Local leadership is great for something like that, right? And I think we went for a very talented director of sales. I think it was... he's definitely not listening, but I think it was a bit of a stretch assignment, and he totally nailed it. Yeah. He kind of grew this whole thing. And then, once you have a couple of people on the sales team, then you have a couple of people then in support and in CS, and suddenly it was a full-on satellite office. Yeah, yeah. And even then, to the degree that we had, myself, I was there, but also we hired then a CFO there, right? And suddenly that became a real... not a similar size part to the European operation, but like sizable, right?
Yeah.
It got its own little piece in the dashboard and everything, right? And I think this way of opening a market, I think is actually pretty straightforward and pretty cheap. I think we did it very capital efficiently.
So I want to double back to something you mentioned, because you said, hey, the next wave was kind of hiring, those leaders there. What was kind of the deciding moment? What was what's the indication kind of to look for that, okay, now it's time to bring on those folks?
I think once you have removed your main risks, meaning product market fit and go-to-market fit, I think then you can think about just hiring kind of the leader, because that's usually then the expensive ticket also, right? Yeah. And in our case, it was very natural because the head of sales was a 1-year assignment, basically, kind of that came to a close.
Yeah.
And then we need to replace that, right? And for us, it was kind of super straightforward to do exactly that. And I think for others, I think the thinking needs to be product market and go to market fit. What I would really recommend is send someone over from the mothership. Send someone over that has gone through some of the product market fit, go to market fit motions early on, which was the case with that head of sales. He was basically our first sales rep. The reason is, if you put in local leadership that basically kind of giving the playbook, I'll execute the playbook, they might just, run this into the wall, right? You need to do a little bit of tweaking and adjusting. I would even recommend for the CEO to go over there for a long while, because there's a lot of figuring out that needs to happen. And you can't just outsource that figuring out to the account executives, right? It doesn't, it doesn't work like that. So I think that is pretty important that you nail that. And I think once you're nailing it, or once you're kind of fairly certain that, well, you haven't optimized it yet, but it works.
Yeah.
Then kind of getting on local leadership is, I think, extremely. That's probably the next best step. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting because one of the things I've picked up on from some of the other companies I've heard of moving, for example, to US or elsewhere, they would hire someone who built up the office, and then all of a sudden it's a separate kind of company, a different identity and culture, and it starts clashing more so than meshing in a good way with the home operations.
I think that that happens. I think every office has its own culture. You could also have two offices in Copenhagen, and there would be different cultures.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the time delay, the time zone stuff, different backgrounds from people, I think that's not helping. But that is, I mean, there are then things, at what time and day are you going to have your all hands?
Yeah. Yeah. And team meetings, I remember, was the issue.
So,
oh, man.
And that gets exasperated by, let me tell you the APAC story. Kind of how did we open up APAC? It was completely random. For some reason, Denmark is a big Aussie country. So lots of Australians are in Denmark, lots of Danish people are in Australia. I don't know why.
No.
But for some reason, it is known. It is a true fact. And since we were from Denmark selling into the UK, which is not a big problem in Denmark because everyone speaks English kind of okay, and the UK is pretty forgiving with accents, and some think that the Danish accent is pretty charming apparently. Yeah. So it was, it's not a problem, but we basically kind of hired, English speaking reps, and then if there's someone that is actually from the UK or from Australia or the US, great, right? So we had a couple of Australians actually on the team. And then one of the guys was basically like, "Hey, mate, I want to go back."
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, too sad, it's too bad. Sad to see you leave. Bye. It's like, no, wait, can I just work from there? Yeah. And this was pre-COVID, right? This was not a okay, time zone is a bit of an issue. It's like, no, that doesn't happen. That doesn't work. Companies like Deal and Remote, I don't know if they existed or not, but at least no one used them because they were sketchy. Yeah. And they're still probably sketchy, but everyone is using them. So really all of this goes hand in hand with like, well, you need to now open an incorporated in APAC, in Australia. I think we did use some kind of office space, like we work actually at the point in time. But basically what happened with that gentleman, and I was super against it. I was like, that's never going to work.
Yeah.
And whenever he sees me, which is never at this point, he's like, see, Tony, I told you.
Yeah.
And he's totally right about this. But he basically flew down there, opened up shop, like a mini office just for himself, and started calling.
Yeah.
And, processing the inbounds. And suddenly it went from like one person to, I think it's like 30 people or something like this now. It's like or more even. And he is still the guy. Yeah. It's so funny. He's basically, I think he's almost the GM now. Yeah. Kind of managing this region. It started with, can I have an SDR? Yeah. It's like, I mean, that's the easiest thing you can ask of me. It's like, sure, have an SDR. 1 or 2. Yeah. And then it's because he was originally actually an account manager. Yeah. Then it's like, okay, I can handle those customers, no problem. And at some point was like, no, I think I need a CSM now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, like with too much success. And then, you know, CSM, support, and suddenly we had then, you know, to your point, we had like global coverage in terms of support. We had support in basically every time zone. Toyota was one of our biggest customers, and in Australia, it's fairly straightforward to find Japanese speakers. So we kind of hired a Japanese speaking CSM/support to cover Japan.
Yeah.
Right, from that perspective. And then this thing grew, and I think it was probably completely profitable. Like from
from the beginning.
from day one.
Yeah.
It was basically cash producing at that point.
Yeah.
And I also got to say another addition here is that especially Australia, they feel like they're the forgotten English speaking colony, you know, and
they're like CS.
Yeah, pretty much. And they do appreciate it a lot when you have an office in Australia. Usually it's going to be Sydney or Melbourne, but basically if you have an office there, that's like extremely highly appreciated from them. And I, you know, we chatted previously, you know, to this episode with a couple of folks here on the team, and no one has ever seen Australia go south. Meaning kind of, you know, that expansion never working out. It always kind of works out. You can always make money in this market, because the competitive pieces, I don't know, for some reason it's not.
But I think it's also we joke sometimes around, well, UK is such a hard market because every single American company who want to have a beachhead into Europe, that's where they start.
Yeah.
Great for taxes and blah, 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 blah. But it's kind of silly. You could choose, I don't know, Belgium or some other obscure market.
80 million people versus 5 million people?
Yeah. But it's just to say, you know, then it gets super bloody, that market, versus Australia is like, well, who want to move all the way down there and open up shop? But what we saw just from the marketing perspective was, well, not that many were running ads. So we could, it was cheaper. We could acquire leads cheaper for that gentleman down there. Great. Yeah. He could be on the web chat. So we had 24/7 coverage rather than 2/3 of the day. Great. More leads and opportunities. And so all these spillover effects started happening as well.
No, it was great. And again, I think the APEC thing was super cheap, super scrappy, but also very luck dependent, right? Because you already had someone that grew up in the mothership, that knew how things worked. He was an AE, then he was an AM. He worked super closely with the CSMs. He's also a switched on guy that, you know, understood product.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to go back. So there was no force. You know, with the head of sales that was going to the US, it was like always a bit of a pain. Understandably so, because his wife basically kind of got pregnant in that time, and she wasn't there. She was in Denmark, and kind of that sucks for everyone, basically, right? And then him wanting to go home all the time. I mean, it totally makes sense. It's not, you know, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But if you have the opposite force of like, no, I want to be there.
Yeah.
And I know everything about this company. I want to build up this market. That is fantastic, but it's also hard to replicate. It's like, oh, let's bank on that.
Yeah.
So there were a couple of things kind of coming together that made it extremely successful, super scrappy. And I think, generally speaking, CAC payback wise, I think Australia is much softer and nicer than to go to the US, right? I think when you do the US, you always need to realize that you do it for a strategic reason, which usually has to do with funding and with exit markets. Because it's almost like, okay, if you can make it in the US, then you can probably be a big company.
Yeah.
If you make it in Australia, it's like, okay, cool.
Are you going to be Atlassian? It's like,
Not
sure.
Or the other company out of Australia.
Yeah.
No, but it's like, it's not proving anything,
no.
Right? You're not, a global player, on your work way to that. Is you're achieving something in Australia, and that's nice for you, but there's no strategic value.
Yeah. So there's one thing I kind of then want to circle back to, because we've kind of outlined some of the steps you can take to get there. We've talked a lot about the benefits. I just want to circle back to, when is it actually the right time to consider moving out? Because you talked about the TAM and blah, blah, blah. So how should the listener, if this is something they potentially want to recommend to a boss, or they are the boss and want to think about this, what are kind of how should the stars be aligned?
I think it needs to come from a place where you feel the end of the S-curve in this market is approaching. Or a version of that. Basically, okay, this is, we figured this out, it's working out, but I couldn't just double the team right now. Right? Once you start having those thoughts, I think then going somewhere else is usually kind of a good thing. And what we've learned, and tiny Denmark, we've been operating for 5 or 6 years, I don't know, less. And then we acquired a local competitor. They had customers that we didn't even have in our CRM. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
you basically realize, yes, it's a tiny market, but there's still plenty of room here.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying it never truly is a TAM issue. But you start getting this creepy feeling of like, if I doubled my team, I think we would run out of space, right?
Yeah.
And you can do all kinds of nice analysis with, sizing the TAM up, using a lot of statistical information. It's like you can do some of these things, but sometimes also a bit of a gut thing that comes out. Number one, obviously, you might need to prove something strategically, and therefore you go to the US. But number two, it's more like you want to create fertile ground to start a couple of new S-curves. That's basically how I'm seeing it, right? You want to go to Germany and UK and the US, obviously. Kind of those are markets that you want to establish yourself. And once you have, you can scale into infinity there.
Yeah.
It's like there's nothing going to hold you back, right? So it's almost a necessary step for you to take. Now, if you're in the US, no, you don't actually have to do that. You can go IPO, just selling domestically. There's no reason for you to expand internationally. If you look though into all of those public companies, most of them go public with like 10% international business. And then over time, where's money coming from is international business suddenly, right? And suddenly they have like 40-50% of their revenues are sitting internationally. And that is again, that's the S curve that you can drive there suddenly. And when is the point in time specific? It's really, really hard to say, right? So that's why I would almost default back to, do you feel you can keep doubling your team? And if the answer is no, then it's probably time for a new market.
Okay.
There's one other story actually. Now that I'm thinking of this, and this was less so mid-market motion, more an SMB motion. And what we did, or what we wanted to do, I'm a bit fuzzy on my past here on this, but we basically created a scaled down version of the product. It wasn't as robust and couldn't do all the bells and whistles, but a very scaled down version. And then we basically put this online. You could purchase online in every single market that we weren't currently covering, which meant we could tap into global demand super cheaply. And then we could use the data from that to figure out, where do we have accidental product market fit? Where are people just clicking this thing, going through the process, paying the money, and are happy and really like it. And then we could say like, oh, see there, Portugal works out great, or Middle East works out great. Why not double down there? Why not add some features? Why not I don't know, do some localization for them now and so forth. So this is another Scrappy way of how you can figure this out, where something works. It's very specific and usually more like a PLG motion where that works out. But that's a great way to also be scrappy about where to even expand, right? Because everyone is, let's go to the United States. And that sometimes, especially in current times, is maybe not the best way to do it.
No. Okay.
Wonderful. So we talked about being scrappy in opening up new markets, and I think we went through 3 little stories here. One is how we went from Denmark to the US in a scrappy way, how we went from Denmark to Australia in a scrappy way, and then lastly, how we went from Denmark to, global, to figure out where to double down on.
That's it.
So much energy with you today, Mikko.
I'm just wondering what the outro is going to be. That's it. That's all I'm worried
Leave
about.
a review to help the cause.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that. With those words, hope this was helpful. Hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Mikko. Thank you, everyone else. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.